Welcome to part 2 of how to make a fairy love seat out of polymer clay. Hi, I'm Caroline from CertainlyCaroline.com, and I'm here inspiring you to create a miniature fairy tale world with weekly miniature art and doll making videos. In part 1, I finished applying the clay onto the armature, and now in part 2, I'm showing you how I painted the love seat and how I glued on the rocks and the moss. If you missed part 1, be sure to watch it by clicking on the link in the description below. First thing to do, most definitely before painting, would be to bake it according to your clay's instructions. As I paint, I'm working in sections here, starting by applying black onto the girl fairy's face, and I'm trying to get black into the crevices, and then I feather it out with a dry brush. The brush I'm using is just a stiff bristle brush, probably hog hair. I found it's a lot easier to feather with a stiffer brush. I'm using Genesis paints, which are set with heat, so you actually bake the paint to get it to dry, but you can use acrylic paint just as well. And here I'm adding some green in some places to create a moss kind of lichen look. Then I'm rubbing some of the paint off with a paper napkin and going back over it with the dry brush again. Adding black again onto the crevices, so basically I'm just building up the paint, building up the darker tones in the areas that I think appropriate. And here I'm adding some brown paint, not all over, just in some areas. In retrospect, I wish I had added more brown since the rocks have a lot of browns in them. The brown color creates a warmer hue and more depth. In part 1, I mentioned I was going to paint a fairy scene on the back of the love seat. I decided instead to add more texture with the clay. Now, if you used acrylic paint, you don't want to put that back into the oven. But since I used Genesis, I'm not worried about it going back into the oven. And what's great about polymer clay is that it can be baked and baked and baked again. So you can never make an unforgivable mistake. Polymer clay is very forgiving. I decided to make a butterfly design on the back, so here I am sculpting that, even though my couch is already baked. And I attached the unbaked polymer clay with liquid Sculpey. Liquid Sculpey is just liquid polymer clay. It looks and feels like Elmer's glue. See it squished down nice and tight? Can you tell I like this stuff? I also used liquid Sculpey in the crevices on the legs and underneath the seat for reinforcement. And the little butterfly body, super simple to make. And it's ready to go into the oven. After I bake it again, I'll paint it some more. Make sure you let it completely cool down before painting it. To get things done quicker, I use Genesis Thinner Medium, which really thins out the paint nicely. If you're using acrylic, you can mix it with some water to thin it. Thinning the paint makes it easier to rub off with the napkin. And I'm satisfied with my painting, so I bake it to set it in place for good. Once the couch has cooled, I get to add the rocks. I use a 2-part epoxy glue. I squeeze out equal parts and mix them together with a craft stick. I position my rocks first before gluing them. I found these lovely rocks on the beach of Lake Michigan, and they are excellent for fairy furniture. Globbing on the glue here, while still being very careful not to get any on the front of the rock. The glue dries shiny, so it looks really bad if you accidentally get it on someplace you don't want it. Another thing, I was careful to make sure the rocks were being supported by the wire framework and not just the polymer clay. Once I've got all the rocks glued in place, I let the epoxy dry for about 3 to 4 hours. Now for the fun, adding the moss. I'm using Fabri-Tac glue. Fabri-Tac kind of works like magic, and faux moss. I'm going with fake moss rather than dried moss because I want this to be a very permanent piece. Dried moss will eventually dry out so that it crumbles, and that's all right if you only need a little bit and it goes into crevices and it hardly ever gets touched. But since I'm going to need a lot of moss, I'm going to go with the faux moss. I'm using 2 different colors, though it's hard to tell from the video. Using different colors helps to make it look more realistic. The faux moss really does an incredible job, and in some ways I like the look even better than dried moss because dried moss isn't as dense. It looks more straggly than the faux moss. And finally, for the finishing touches, I'm using acrylic paint, again for some color variation for a more realistic look. And then I'm just kind of dabbing with my finger to blend that in. Hey, thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe for weekly miniature art and doll making videos every Monday or sometimes Tuesday.